Maimonides wrote for a world in crisis, where educated Jews felt torn between Greek philosophy and the Torah. They feared that embracing one meant abandoning the other entirely, creating a deep intellectual and spiritual conflict that threatened the community's future stability. This internal tension led to a structured response. His work was designed not as an introduction to faith, but as a guide for those already learned yet intellectually destabilized, ensuring that belief could be reconciled with rigorous philosophical thought, preventing fragmentation. Forced into exile from Islamic Spain, Maimonides learned firsthand that belief systems must be robust enough to survive immense pressure. This experience in North Africa shaped his conviction that true faith required an intellectual framework capable of withstanding external challenges and internal doubts. This practical realization informed his method. He constructed a system where core beliefs were not dependent on comfort or political stability, but were fortified by logic, allowing them to be preserved and transmitted even through displacement and persecution across different cultures. As a preeminent legal authority, Maimonides observed that law alone was becoming insufficient for educated minds. Simply following commandments without a deeper philosophical understanding was leading to confusion and doubt, rather than reinforcing a coherent and resilient faith system. The result was a project to unify law with philosophy. He aimed to show that the legal structure of the Torah was not arbitrary, but was instead a manifestation of a profound and rational system, thereby restoring its intellectual authority for a skeptical generation. The Guide for the Perplexed was written for a deliberately narrow audience. It targeted only trained readers, individuals already well-versed in Jewish law and scripture, but who were experiencing a crisis of faith due to their engagement with challenging philosophical questions. This selective approach created a protected intellectual space. By addressing only those prepared for its complexities, the book could explore sensitive topics without risking the misinterpretation of its ideas by those who lacked the necessary foundational knowledge or intellectual discipline. Maimonides' first battle was over language itself. He argued that Scripture often speaks in metaphors and allegories, not because divine truth is unclear, but because human language is fundamentally limited in its ability to describe a non-physical, transcendent reality. This interpretive key unlocked the text for philosophical minds. It allowed readers to understand that descriptions of God's actions were not literal accounts, but were accommodations to human comprehension, preserving the Torah's integrity while resolving apparent contradictions with logic. He identified anthropomorphism, the attribution of human forms or characteristics to God, as a form of theological poison. Maimonides treated the belief in a corporeal God as a functional type of idolatry, regardless of the sincerity or piety of the believer holding it. This led to a systematic purification of religious thought. The goal was to build a concept of God free from physical limitations, ensuring that worship was directed toward a truly transcendent being, not a mental image constructed from finite human experience. Consequently, any physical or emotional description of God had to be systematically rejected. All references to God having a form, making movements, experiencing emotions, or occupying a specific space were reinterpreted as profound misunderstandings of Scripture, not acts of genuine devotion. The practical effect was a mental discipline for the believer. It required an active effort to strip away all imaginative and sensory concepts of the divine, training the mind to approach God through abstract intellect rather than through familiar but misleading physical analogies. Calling God wise or powerful was seen as philosophically dangerous. Maimonides warned that using such positive attributes risks reducing God to human categories, which would ultimately collapse the essential and absolute uniqueness of the divine nature into something familiar and limited. This forced a radical shift in theological language. Instead of describing God with positive terms, which are always drawn from created existence, the focus moved toward a method that could honor divine transcendence without confining it within the limits of human vocabulary. Negative theology became the core defensive strategy for speaking about God. Maimonides taught that it is safer and more accurate to state what God is not, rather than making positive claims about what God is, which are inevitably flawed and limited. This system provides a framework for intellectual humility. By focusing on negation, God is not a body, not in time, not multiple, the believer can approach the concept of divine reality without falling into the trap of defining it with inadequate human terminology. Divine unity, for Maimonides, is absolute and not merely numerical. God is not one in a series of other things, but is an utterly indivisible and simple being, entirely without parts, composition, or distinct attributes that could imply any form of multiplicity. This concept establishes God's radical otherness. It means that the divine being is fundamentally different from anything in the created world, which is always composite and divisible, thereby securing God's position as the ultimate uncaused source of all existence. Maimonides utilized Aristotelian philosophy as a powerful tool, but never as a master. He adopted its logical methods and conclusions only in areas where he believed philosophy could achieve certainty, such as logic and physics, but rejected its speculative claims. This selective integration allowed him to build a rational foundation for faith. By demonstrating that reason and revelation were not in conflict, he could use philosophical arguments to support theological principles, without surrendering the ultimate authority of the Torah's teachings. The doctrine of creation from nothing, or ex nihilo, was presented as the hinge of the entire religious system. He argued that this belief preserves the meaning of divine law, the possibility of miracles, and the authority of revelation from a sovereign God. Without creation ex nihilo, if matter were eternal alongside God, it would impose limits on divine power. This would dissolve the basis for religious obligation, as laws and miracles could be seen as mere negotiations with pre-existing natural constraints, not divine commands. Miracles are not random acts of divine intervention. Maimonides explained that they exist within the framework of divine wisdom and natural order, representing not arbitrary disruptions, but the realization of possibilities embedded within creation from the very beginning of time. This reinterpretation preserves the consistency of divine action. It prevents the view of God as an emotional being who intervenes based on whim, instead presenting a universe governed by a stable and overarching rational plan that includes even rare and extraordinary events. Prophecy is presented as a structured and attainable perfection of the human intellect. It requires intense intellectual refinement and rigorous moral discipline, not simply ecstatic states, mystical experiences, or personal charisma. It is the highest level of human development. This turns prophecy into a predictable system. It is the natural result of perfecting one's rational and imaginative faculties, culminating in an overflow of divine influx from the active intellect, making it an achievement of disciplined effort rather than an unpredictable gift. Maimonides established that prophecy has distinct levels and is not a uniform gift. He created a hierarchy of prophets based on the clarity of their intellectual perception and the medium through which they received their revelation, turning it into a graded system. This ranking served a crucial purpose. By organizing prophetic experience into a clear hierarchy, it allowed him to analyze and categorize different forms of revelation described in Scripture, providing a rational structure for what might otherwise seem like disparate and chaotic accounts. The prophecy of Moses is presented as categorically unique and stands alone. Unlike all other prophets, Moses received revelation directly from God, without the intermediary of imagination, justifying the permanent and unparalleled authority of the Torah law given through him. This uniqueness provides the foundation for Jewish law's eternal validity. Because the Mosaic revelation is qualitatively superior to all others, the legal and theological system it established, the Torah, cannot be superseded or replaced by any subsequent prophetic claims or texts. The commandments of the Torah are shown to form a rational and coherent system. Every law, whether ritual or ethical, is designed to achieve a specific goal, shaping correct beliefs, promoting social welfare, or cultivating individual moral and intellectual virtue. This transforms the perception of religious law. The commandments are not arbitrary tests of obedience from an inscrutable ruler, but are a divine pedagogical tool, a comprehensive training program for the perfection of human society and the individual soul. Idolatry is identified as the great historical and psychological enemy of pure monotheism. Maimonides argued that a significant number of the Torah's commandments were specifically designed to uproot and counteract the pagan practices and beliefs embedded in ancient Near Eastern cultures. This historical context explains many seemingly strange laws. Practices related to agriculture, mourning, and worship were directly targeting the idolatrous habits of neighboring civilizations, acting as a behavioral firewall to protect the integrity of Israelite belief and social structure. The laws of animal sacrifice are strategically reinterpreted. Maimonides presents them not as an ideal form of worship, but as a necessary transitional system that redirected ancient universal patterns of sacrificial worship toward the service of the one true God. This was a divine concession to human psychology. Rather than abolishing a deeply ingrained mode of worship abruptly, God channeled it, gradually weaning the people off its pagan associations and preparing them for higher forms of service, such as prayer and contemplation. Rituals like prayer and daily observance are framed as disciplines that train the human soul. Their purpose is not primarily emotional expression, but the gradual reshaping of character and behavior over time through consistent and deliberate practice, reinforcing correct beliefs and habits. This makes religious practice a form of behavioral therapy. The consistent performance of rituals instills virtues like humility, gratitude, and awareness of God, creating a stable internal disposition that aligns the individual's entire life with theological truths. For Maimonides, ethics and intellect are inseparable. He argued that possessing profound knowledge of God without corresponding moral refinement is an incomplete and fundamentally unstable state. True perfection requires the unification of both intellectual and moral excellence in a person. This creates a holistic vision of the ideal human. The ultimate goal is not just to know the truth, but to live it, embodying the rational and ethical principles of the Torah in one's character and actions, thereby imitating divine ways. Evil is not a substance created by God. Instead, Maimonides defines evil as the absence of good, originating from the inherent limitations of matter, human ignorance, or the misuse of free will. It is a privation, not a positive force in creation. This resolves the theological problem of evil. God, being purely good, creates only good. Evil enters the world not by divine design, but as a byproduct of matter's deficiency, and humanity's failure to actualize its potential for goodness and wisdom. Divine providence is proportional, not universally equal. Maimonides taught that the degree of divine care and protection an individual receives increases in direct relation to their intellectual and moral development, specifically their connection to God through contemplation of truth. This system links providence directly to human effort. It incentivizes intellectual and ethical striving, as the more one perfects their mind and character, the more they participate in the divine influx, and the more they are sheltered from the randomness of material existence. Human freedom of choice serves as the anchor for moral responsibility. The entire system of law, reward, and punishment only functions if human beings are granted genuine freedom to choose their actions, rather than merely acting out a predetermined destiny. This principle preserves the justice of the divine system. Because choice is real, accountability is meaningful. Individuals are rightly held responsible for their moral and ethical decisions, as these actions originate from their own will and are not coerced by fate. The guide for the perplexed deliberately hides as much as it reveals. Maimonides employed intentionally obscure passages, contradictions, and scattered arguments to prevent unprepared readers from misusing its powerful philosophical ideas, which could destabilize their faith if misunderstood. This esoteric writing style acts as a protective filter. It ensures that only the intended audience, those with the necessary intellectual and spiritual maturity, can piece together the book's deepest teachings, while casual or unfit readers are left with only surface-level interpretations.